There's something about the Appalachian roads at night. The fog that rolls down from the hills, the way the trees seem to lean closer the farther you drive. Every local has their own story. A friend who vanished, a voice on the radio that wasn't supposed to be there, a light that followed their car for miles. Tonight, we're traveling those roads again. From haunted gas stations to empty motels, from detours that lead nowhere to passengers that were never alive. These are the true-style Appalachian Halloween horror stories. Tales of what happens when the road ahead goes silent, and you realize you're not alone anymore. Welcome to Fear Spiral. If you love true horror, suspense, and realistic encounters, subscribe now and join the spiral. New horror every week. Just remember, once you enter, it's hard to find your way back out. The gas station on Route 19. It was Halloween night 2019, and I was driving alone through southern West Virginia after visiting my brother in Beckley. The plan was to make it back home to Fayetteville before midnight, but I took the long route, Route 19, because I wanted to avoid the interstate traffic. The sky was overcast, the woods were skeletal, and the radio kept cutting in and out as I wound through the mountain roads. It was around 11:15 p.m. when my gas light came on. I hadn't seen a town in miles. Just the endless curves of the highway, the trees pressing in close, and the occasional distant sound of a train echoing through the hills. My phone had 1 bar of signal, barely enough for GPS. That's when I saw the glow of a single fluorescent light up ahead, an old gas station, tucked off the main road like something out of another decade. The sign said Harlow's Gas and Market. The letters flickered like they were trying to give up. The parking lot was cracked and half covered in leaves. One old pickup sat by the far corner, but I couldn't see anyone inside. I pulled up to the pump and got out, immediately noticing how quiet it was. No wind, no bugs, not even the hum of the pump, just silence. I swiped my card, but the screen didn't respond. After a few tries, I sighed and walked toward the store. The glass door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled stale, like old wood and gasoline. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but half of them were dead. Shelves of dusty snacks and faded magazines lined the aisles. I walked to the counter, but no one was there. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small in the empty space. After a few seconds, I heard shuffling from somewhere in the back. Then a voice, low, rasping, like the person hadn't spoken in days, said, "Be right with you." I felt a strange chill creep up my arms. Something about that voice didn't sound right. I glanced at the clock above the register, 11:23 p.m. I looked around again. No security cameras. No sound but the buzzing light and that faint movement in the back. A man finally appeared. He was tall, thin, and pale. His skin looked almost gray under the light. His hair was stringy and stuck to his forehead, and his eyes were wide and glassy. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Pump not working?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I tried swiping, but it wouldn't take my card." He looked at me for a long second, then said, "You can pay inside." "Pump 4, I hesitated. There were only 2 pumps outside. I forced a laugh. "You mean pump 2? He didn't answer, just kept smiling. Trying not to show how uneasy I felt, I handed him my card. His fingers were cold, ice cold when they brushed mine. He slid it into a dusty old register that looked like it hadn't been used in years. "No beeps, no receipts, nothing. That should do it," he muttered. I hurried outside. The pump worked this time, oddly enough. The moment I lifted the nozzle, I felt eyes on me. I turned. No one was there, but I swore I saw movement through the window inside the store. The man was gone. The forest beyond the parking lot looked darker than it should have. I could hear faint rustling, like someone walking just out of sight. The nozzle clicked off, and I jumped at the sound. My nerves were shot. As I got back in the car, I looked toward the building one last time. The lights inside were flickering faster now, and I realized the pickup truck that had been parked there earlier was gone. I didn't hear it leave. I drove off fast, heart pounding. About 5 minutes down the road, curiosity got the better of me. I looked in my rearview mirror. The gas station was completely dark, like it had never been lit at all. When I finally got home, I checked my bank statement, no charge from Harlow's Gas and Market. A week later, I mentioned it to a local coworker. He frowned and said, "You mean the old Harlow's out on 19? That place burned down back in 2007. I haven't taken Route 19 at night since. The woman on the bridge. This happened last year, the night before Halloween. I was a college student driving home from Boone, North Carolina, to visit my parents near the Virginia border. It was close to 2:30 a.m., and the fog was so thick it looked like the headlights were cutting through milk. The road wound tightly along the mountains with drop-offs that disappeared into blackness. About 20 minutes north of town, I reached an old iron bridge that crossed a narrow ravine. The structure looked ancient. Rusted beams, warped guardrails, and old wooden planks underneath the asphalt that made a hollow echo every time your tires rolled over them. I slowed down, both from the fog and because that bridge always creeped me out. Locals said a woman had jumped there back in the 1970s. As I rolled across, I saw something ahead in the fog, a figure standing dead center of the bridge. I hit the brakes hard. My headlights lit her up. She was barefoot, wearing a long white dress that clung to her in the damp air. Her hair hung in wet tangles over her face. At first I thought she was hurt or drunk. I rolled down the window just enough to call out, "Ma'am, are you okay?" No response. She didn't even flinch. I felt that heavy pressure in my chest, the kind you get when something in your gut screams, "Don't move." I tried to convince myself she was just someone who'd had too much to drink at a Halloween party. But when I looked closer, I realized her feet weren't touching the ground. They hovered just an inch or two above the wet pavement. Every instinct in me said drive. I hit the gas, swerving slightly to the right to avoid her. As I passed, I dared one quick look through the window. And that's when she turned her head. Her face was pale and stretched, like the skin didn't fit right. Her mouth hung open in a silent scream, and her eyes were completely black. I sped off the bridge, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. When I looked in the rearview mirror, she was standing on the guardrail watching me go. Then, she simply vanished into the fog. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 15 miles down the road. I sat there shaking, trying to convince myself it was exhaustion or a trick of the light. But when I got out to clear my head, I noticed muddy handprints on the passenger side door. The next morning, I mentioned the bridge to my mom. She went pale immediately and said, "That sounds like the old Elk River Bridge. They tore that down years ago," I checked later. The new bridge is about a mile from where I thought I was that night. So I don't know what road I actually drove over, but I can still hear the hollow echo of those wooden planks under my tires. And sometimes, late at night, I catch the faint sound of a woman crying whenever I drive through fog. The house beyond the curve. This happened on October 30th, 2021, the night before Halloween. I was driving through the mountains of eastern Kentucky, heading back to Knoxville after visiting my aunt near Pikeville. The whole day had been overcast, and by the time I hit the mountain roads, a thick mist had rolled in. The GPS had lost signal miles back, and the two-lane road twisted endlessly through the woods. It was close to 1 a.m. when I realized I hadn't passed another car in over an hour. I remember checking the fuel gauge, just under a quarter tank left, and telling myself I'd stop at the next town. But there was nothing. No lights, no signs, not even a mailbox. The trees pressed in close to the road, their branches like skeletal hands scratching the edges of my headlights. I turned off the radio just to focus, but that made the silence worse. You could almost hear the fog moving. Then the car started to sputter. At first I thought it was bad gas, but when I looked down, the needle was dipping lower, somehow faster than it should have. Within a minute, the engine began to choke. I barely coasted to the side of the road before it died completely. When the sound of the engine faded, the silence hit hard. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, realizing I was completely alone in the middle of nowhere. No cell service, no passing cars, and the nearest town probably 20 miles away. After a few minutes, I decided to get out and look around. The air was damp and cold, smelling of wet leaves and old pine. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. My flashlight beam sliced through the mist, catching glimpses of the guardrail, the trees, and a mailbox. It was a few yards up the road, rusted, half-collapsed, with the name Rowan barely visible under peeling paint. I followed the gravel driveway that curved up into the woods. I hesitated, thinking it might be trespassing, but the chill in the air and the idea of sitting in a dead car for hours made up my mind. The path was narrow, with wet leaves crunching under my boots. It wound up a hill for what felt like half a mile before I saw it. A small two-story house, dark except for a dim orange light glowing from a front window. Something about it looked wrong. The roof sagged on one side and the wood was blackened as if it had been burned long ago. But the light, that faint flickering light, was the only sign of life for miles. I walked up the steps and knocked softly on the door. No answer. I tried again, louder this time. The sound echoed strangely inside, like the house was hollow. Finally, I heard slow footsteps from the other side of the door, followed by the click of an old latch. The door creaked open an inch and an elderly woman peered out. Her face was thin and lined, her gray hair tied back in a loose bun. She wore a faded nightgown and looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said quickly. "My car ran out of gas on the road. I just needed to use a phone or—" She shook her head. "Phone's been out since the storm. Come inside, you can wait till morning." Something in me hesitated, but standing in the freezing fog, it felt like my only choice. I stepped in. The air inside was warm but heavy, filled with the smell of wood smoke and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. The light came from an old kerosene lamp sitting on a table. The furniture was mismatched and ancient, covered in lace and dust. "Thank you," I said, glancing around. "I'll just wait here until daylight, if that's okay." She nodded, then shuffled toward the kitchen. "You can sit by the fire. Been a cold week?" I sat down near the hearth where a few embers glowed faintly. My eyes adjusted slowly, and that's when I noticed the portraits on the wall. Dozens of them. Men, women, and children, all in faded frames. But they didn't look like normal family photos. The faces were expressionless, almost waxy, and all of them seemed to have the same strange, glassy eyes. I tried not to stare. After a few minutes, she returned, carrying a chipped mug of something steaming. "It's tea," she said softly. "Warm you up." I took it, but the smell was off. Bitter, earthy, not like any tea I'd ever had. I pretended to sip it and set it down on the table beside me. "Do you live here alone?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She smiled faintly. "Oh, not alone. My family's here. Always been here." The way she said it made my stomach tighten. I looked toward the staircase at the end of the hall. It was completely dark up there, but I thought I saw movement, a shadow shifting just beyond the railing. I froze. "There's someone else here, isn't there?" I asked quietly. She turned her head slowly toward the stairs and said, almost in a whisper, "They don't like strangers walking up there." Then, without another word, she went back into the kitchen. Every instinct in my body screamed to leave. I stood up, heart pounding, and quietly stepped toward the door. But when I looked through the small glass pane, the fog outside was so dense I couldn't even see the porch. It was like a white wall pressing against the house. The floor creaked behind me. I turned, expecting to see her. But instead, a figure was standing at the end of the hallway. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing an old suit that looked almost black under the lamplight. His skin was grayish, like the color had drained from him. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. "Sir," I said shakily, "I didn't mean to intrude. I just needed—" He tilted his head, slow and unnatural. And then from upstairs I heard footsteps. More than one pair. Slow, dragging steps moving toward the landing. The old woman's voice came from the kitchen again, distant now. "You shouldn't have come up the drive tonight. It's All Hallows Eve. The Rowan house wakes then." I didn't wait. I grabbed my jacket, yanked the door open, and plunged into the fog. The cold air hit me like ice. I ran blindly down the driveway, branches slapping my face. Behind me, I heard the creak of the porch steps. Someone or something was following. The fog seemed alive, swirling thicker with every step. I could barely see the gravel beneath my feet. I tripped once, scraping my palms, but I didn't stop. Eventually, I saw the faint outline of my car. When I reached it, the keys were shaking so badly in my hands that it took me 3 tries to get them in the door. I got inside, slammed it shut, and somehow the engine turned over on the first try. I floored it. As I sped down the mountain road, I looked in the rearview mirror. Through the fog at the top of the hill, I saw that same faint orange light glowing from the Rowan house window. But then, right before I turned the curve, I swear I saw 3 figures standing at the edge of the drive. The woman, the man, and something smaller between them. By the time I reached a gas station on Route 80 around 3 a.m., I was shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone when it finally got signal. I told the attendant what happened. He just looked at me strangely and said, "Man, buddy, there ain't no house up that road. Rowan Place burned down back in the 80s. Whole family died in that fire. You sure you weren't dreaming? I drove that same stretch of road again last month just to see. The mailbox is still there, rusted, collapsed, but the driveway's gone. Just a patch of overgrown brush and blackened soil beyond the curve. And yet every Halloween since, when I pass that area, I see a faint orange glow through the trees. I don't stop anymore." The last motel vacancy. This happened to me on Halloween night 2021, the same weekend a lot of strange things were said to have happened across the Appalachians. I was driving through the Cherokee National Forest on my way from Asheville to Chattanooga after visiting a friend. I'd left later than I meant to, around 11 p.m., and underestimated how empty those mountain roads get after midnight. The rain started not long after I passed Murphy, just a steady cold drizzle that turned into fog thick enough to swallow my headlights. By 1:30 a.m., I was exhausted. The winding roads, the darkness, the rain, it was starting to blur together. When I saw the faded neon glow of a sign up ahead, I actually felt relieved. It flickered pink and white through the fog. Mountain View Motel, vacancy. The building looked ancient, 2 stories long and narrow, with all the doors facing the parking lot. The sign buzzed weakly, one side half lit. I pulled in and parked near the office. Only 2 other cars were there, both old sedans with plates I couldn't read through the rain. Inside, the lobby smelled of mildew and cigarettes. A small bell sat on the counter next to a ledger book instead of a computer. I rang the bell once, and after a long pause, a man came out from a back room. He was thin, probably in his 60s, with a gray mustache and deep-set eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in a while. "Got a room?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He stared for a few seconds before answering. "One left," he said slowly. "End of the row. Number 12, cash only." I hesitated. I don't usually carry cash, but I happened to have $60 in my wallet. I handed it over. He didn't give me a receipt, just slid an old brass key across the counter and said, "Checkout's at sunrise." That wording felt strange, but I was too tired to care. Room 12 was at the far end, under a broken light that made the rain look like falling ash. The door creaked open into a small room with faded floral wallpaper, a single bed, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of bleach and rust. I set my bag down and locked the door behind me. The sound of rain against the window was constant, almost hypnotic. I turned on the old box TV, but it only picked up static. My phone had no service. Typical mountain reception. I lay down on the bed, fully dressed, just planning to rest my eyes for a few minutes. But sometime later, maybe 2:40 a.m., I woke up suddenly, heart racing. Something had pulled me out of sleep, though I couldn't say what at first. Then I realized the rain had stopped completely. The room was dead silent. That silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, like the air itself was listening. Then came a faint sound and a single footstep outside my door. I froze. Another footstep followed, slow and deliberate, splashing lightly in the puddles outside. Whoever it was stopped right in front of my door. I held my breath. After a few seconds, there was a soft tap. Tap, tap, like fingernails brushing against the wood. "Front desk?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. "Everything okay?" No answer. Just silence. Then a faint rustling, like someone dragging something across the wet concrete walkway. I got up slowly, stepped closer to the door, and looked through the peephole. Nothing. Just the fog outside, rolling thickly past the dim parking lot lights. I waited another minute before backing away. Maybe it was just another guest. Maybe someone drunk. I tried to convince myself of that and went to sit on the edge of the bed. That's when I noticed the carpet by the door, wet footprints, small and bare, leading halfway into the room before fading out. I hadn't heard the door open. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. I got up, checked the lock. It was still latched from the inside. I couldn't understand it. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when the TV clicked on by itself. Static filled the room, loud and distorted, but through it I could hear whispering, faint, fragmented, like a dozen voices talking under the surface. I stepped closer, staring at the screen. For a second, between the waves of static, I saw what looked like a figure standing in a hallway. Tall, featureless, lit from behind by some kind of orange glow. Then it flickered away. I lunged forward and pulled the plug from the wall. The whispering stopped instantly. I stood there in the dark, breathing hard. Then I heard it again, those slow, wet footsteps, this time above me. Room 12 was on the end of the row, but it still had a room overhead, part of a second-floor section. The footsteps went from one end to the other, then stopped right above my bed. Dust fell from the ceiling with each creak of the floorboards. I stared up, too afraid to move. Then faintly I heard a sound that made my stomach drop, a dragging noise like furniture being scraped slowly across the floor directly above. Finally, I'd had enough. I grabbed my jacket, unlocked the door, and stepped out into the cold. The fog had rolled back in, swallowing everything beyond a few feet. I looked up. The second-floor windows were completely dark except for one, faintly glowing orange, the same color I'd seen on the TV screen. I started toward the office. The walkway was slick, my breath visible in the air. As I passed room 10, I noticed the door hanging slightly open. A sliver of light flickered inside. Against my better judgment, I glanced through the crack. The room looked identical to mine, same wallpaper, same furniture, none except for one thing. Someone was sitting on the bed. They were turned away from me, long dark hair hanging over their shoulders, head tilted slightly like they were listening to something I couldn't hear. I whispered, "Hello?" The figure's head jerked sharply toward the door. I didn't wait to see the face. I ran. When I reached the lobby, the front door was unlocked, but the lights inside were off. I flicked the switch and nothing. The air smelled stale, like rot and dust. My flashlight beam swept across the counter. No ledger, no bell, just piles of yellowed newspapers. The one on top was dated October 31st, 1992. The headline read, "Mountain View Motel Fire Claims 4 Lives." My throat went dry. I backed away slowly, trying to process what I was seeing. That's when I heard the faintest sound from behind the counter, the creak of a floorboard, followed by the soft shuffle of footsteps. A voice whispered right behind me, "Checkouts at sunrise." I bolted. I ran across the parking lot, keys shaking in my hand, not daring to look back. The fog seemed thicker than ever, like it was pushing against me. I jumped into my car, started the engine, and floored it onto the main road. In the rearview mirror, I could barely make out the motel's outline, the sign flickering violently as if caught in a storm that wasn't there. For 1 second, all the room lights blinked on at once, glowing orange through the fog. Then they went out. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station on Highway 64 around 3:30 a.m. The clerk looked at me funny, soaked, shaking, barely able to talk. When I told him what happened, he just frowned and said, "You sure it was called Mountain View? That place burned down years ago. Folks say you can still see the lights if you drive by too late." He pointed east. "They built a rest stop there now. Nothing left but the old sign." I didn't believe him, not at first. But 2 days later, I went back in daylight. The GPS marked the same turnoff, but all that stood there was a cracked foundation, some scorched stone steps, and a rusted metal frame, half of a neon sign that still read "View." When the wind moved through the trees, I could almost hear that faint buzzing sound, the one from the sign that night. And sometimes, when I'm driving those roads late, the fog rolls in thicker than it should, and I swear I catch a flash of orange light through it, just for a second, and before it disappears. Every year since then, around Halloween, I get the same dream. I'm standing in front of room 12, key in hand, and from behind the door I hear a voice say softly, "We still have a vacancy." I always wake up before I turn the key. The truck that followed me. This happened on Halloween night 2021, the same year as that awful storm that tore through the southern Appalachians. I was driving home from a work trip in eastern Tennessee, trying to make it back to my place near Bluefield, West Virginia before sunrise. It was one of those nights that feels like the air itself is holding its breath, cold, silent, and heavy with fog that hugged the road like smoke. I left around 11:45 p.m., later than I should have, but I figured I could cut straight up through the back highways instead of taking the interstate. It shaved off maybe an hour according to my GPS before the signal dropped somewhere near Irwin. After that, I was flying blind, just me, 2 hours of winding mountain roads, and no cell service. I've always liked driving at night, but that stretch felt different. The mist was so thick that I had to lean forward just to see past the hood of my car. Trees loomed close on both sides, their branches bending inward like claws. The radio couldn't catch a single station. It was all static and faint whispers that might have just been interference. I passed maybe 2 houses in 30 miles, both with their porch lights off. It must have been close to 1 a.m. when I noticed headlights appear in my rearview mirror. At first, I was relieved, a reminder I wasn't completely alone out there. It looked like an old pickup truck, maybe from the 80s, with one of its headlights dimmer than the other. But after a few minutes, something about it started to bother me. The driver stayed at a steady distance behind me, never too close, never far. Every time I slowed on a curve, they slowed. When I sped up, they did too. No passing, no signs of turning off. Just the steady hum of their engine behind me, always keeping pace. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was Halloween night after all. People were out, maybe just heading home from a party. But the longer it went on, the more wrong it felt. Around 1:30 a.m., the fog thickened so much that I could barely see the reflectors on the road. I slowed to about 30, gripping the wheel tight. That's when the truck's high beams flicked on, flooding my mirrors with light. My eyes burned from the glare. I tapped my brakes lightly, not hard enough to be aggressive, just to signal him to back off. The truck didn't budge. Instead, it crept closer. The engine's growl deepened, and I swear I could feel the vibration through the seat. My heart was hammering now, and I could feel sweat forming under my jacket despite the cold. I checked the rear view again, and the grill filled the entire mirror. "What the hell are you doing?" I muttered aloud. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the truck slowed down. The high beams clicked off. I let out a shaky breath and kept driving, scanning for any turnoffs or gas stations. There was nothing. Just the endless forest pressing against both sides of the road. A few miles later, I saw a small green road sign. Beaver Creek, 12 miles. That sounded familiar, like a name I'd seen on a map earlier. I told myself if I could just get there, I'd stop somewhere safe. But the road kept twisting deeper into the dark. The fog was so thick now that even the glow from my headlights looked muted. And then, the headlights reappeared behind me. Closer this time. I didn't even hear the engine approach. 1 minute I was alone. The next, those uneven headlights were cutting through the mist again, maybe 50 feet behind me. My hands were trembling on the wheel. I remember glancing at the dashboard clock. 1:48 a.m. I took a sharp curve too fast, the tires skidding slightly on wet asphalt. The truck matched me perfectly. Not a single swerve, not a single inch of distance gained. That's when I realized it wasn't just following me, and it was mirroring me. Every movement, every change of speed, I decided to test it. There was a narrow dirt turnout up ahead, one of those spots locals use to let faster cars pass. I pulled off suddenly, braking hard. The truck zoomed past me, its taillights glowing red through the fog. Relief washed over me until those taillights stopped. The brake lights stayed on. The truck didn't turn, didn't speed away. It just sat there, idling about 50 yards up the road. Then slowly the reverse lights flicked on. That was the moment real panic hit. I slammed the gear into drive and tore out of the turnout, gravel spraying behind me. The truck accelerated too, not fast, not chasing exactly, but steady. Keeping up. Always there. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear the engine over it. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every tree seemed to lean closer. I drove for what felt like forever, until I finally saw faint lights through the fog. A gas station sign, flickering blue and red. I almost cried. The station looked half abandoned, and one pump, a single trailer-sized building with a dim light inside, but I didn't care. I pulled up fast, jumped out, and ran to the door. A tired-looking man was sitting behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. He looked up when he saw me. "You all right, son?" I turned back toward the road. The fog was rolling past the edge of the lot, but there was no sign of the truck. Just empty highway. There was a truck following me. Old pickup. "It's gone now, but..." The man frowned, stood up, and walked to the window. He looked out for a while, then shook his head. "Ain't seen nobody all night. You must have come up from 39? I nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That road ain't much used these days." Folks around here avoid it after dark. Why? I asked. He hesitated, then said, "Couple years back, some fella died out there. Old Chevy pickup lost control on a curve. They say he was driving home drunk after a Halloween party. Road was fogged in like tonight. Never made it back." I tried to laugh it off. "You think that's what I saw?" He didn't smile. "Maybe. Or maybe just someone playing tricks. Either way, you shouldn't be out there now. You can park here till morning." I nodded, too tired to argue. I sat in my car for a while, doors locked, headlights off. The fog crept around the edges of the parking lot like smoke from an unseen fire. My heartbeat finally slowed, and I must have drifted off at some point. When I woke, the sky was gray with dawn. The gas station lights were off, and the clerk's car was gone. My car window was fogged from the inside. I rubbed a hand across it, and it froze. Someone had drawn something on the glass while I was asleep. It wasn't a word. It was a handprint, smeared and wet, like it had been pressed there from the outside. Except the moisture was on the inside of the glass. The shape of it was large, rough, the lines deep enough that it looked like someone had dragged their fingers downward as they pulled away. I checked around the lot, but there was no one there. The road beyond was empty, quiet, stretching into the fog. I told myself it was condensation or that maybe I'd touched it in my sleep, but when I looked closer, I noticed streaks leading toward the passenger seat. Faint, like something had brushed against the window from inside. I drove away not long after, keeping to the main highway this time. Every so often I'd check my mirror, half expecting those uneven headlights to appear again through the mist. They never did. But a few weeks later, I had to drive through that area again. Broad daylight, clear skies. I almost didn't recognize the stretch of road. Trees had been cut back, pavement repaved. But when I reached that same curve near where I'd pulled off that night, I saw it. An old pickup truck, rusted and half buried in weeds, sitting in a ditch just beyond the bend. The front end was smashed in, windshield gone. A small white cross was planted beside it, surrounded by dead flowers and a faded photo. The name on the cross was Henry Miles. The photo showed a man in his 40s, smiling, wearing a baseball cap. As I stood there, I noticed something faint on the truck's driver's side mirror. A single handprint, the same size, same dragging shape as the one that had appeared on my window. I haven't driven that route since, but every Halloween night, without fail, I wake up around 1:48 a.m., the same time I saw those headlights appear. And for a moment, I swear I can hear the low hum of an old pickup idling somewhere outside my window. And every time, I tell myself it's just the wind, but I never check. The cabin passed mile marker 12. It happened on Halloween night of 2021. The same weekend, a cold front swept across the southern Appalachians and turned the rain into a crawling mist. I was on my way back from visiting family in North Carolina, heading north through the backroads toward a friend's cabin near Beckley, West Virginia. I'd taken those roads before, but never this late. It was a little after 10:30 p.m. when I crossed the sign that read mile marker 12. That marker stuck in my head because everything after it felt wrong. The fog had rolled in thick, almost silver under the moonlight, and my phone had lost signal half an hour earlier. The two-lane mountain road twisted between ridges like a snake, the guardrails slick and shining with drizzle. My windshield wipers squealed against the glass every few seconds, the only sound besides my tires on wet asphalt. When the low fuel light blinked on around 11:15 p.m., I cursed under my breath. The nearest town was supposed to be 20 miles out, and I hadn't seen a single set of headlights since sundown. I told myself I'd make it, that I'd driven on less before. But when the engine coughed a few times and died on a straight stretch, I knew I was done. The silence after the engine stopped was thick, heavier than it should have been. I sat there for a moment, listening to the soft tick of the cooling motor. The fog pressed up against the windows like breath. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, threw on my jacket, and stepped outside. The cold hit me instantly, sharp, wet, metallic. I could smell pine and damp earth, and something else underneath, faint but unpleasant, like burnt plastic or old oil. I locked the car out of habit and started walking. I must have gone half a mile when I saw a faint light through the trees, a warm orange glow that pulsed every few seconds. My first thought was a porch light. Relief flooded me. There was a dirt path branching off the road that I hadn't noticed before, half hidden by weeds. I followed it, boots sinking into mud. The beam from my flashlight bounced off tree trunks slick with moisture. After about 5 minutes, the woods opened into a small clearing, and there it was, a cabin. Old but not abandoned. Smoke drifted from a metal chimney, and the light I'd seen came from a single window beside the door. I hesitated. The door was slightly ajar. I called out, "Hello?" "My car broke down. Anyone home?" No answer. Just the wind moving through the trees. I stepped onto the porch, which creaked under my weight, and knocked. The wood felt damp and cold. Still nothing. I was about to turn around when the door swung open another inch, slow and deliberate, as if nudged from the inside. The warm air that drifted out carried the smell of wood smoke and something cooking. Stew, maybe. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since noon. "Hello?" I tried again. "I don't mean to intrude." When no one answered, I pushed the door open a little more. Inside, the place looked lived in. There was a small fire burning in the stone fireplace, a pot hanging over it. 2 chairs, one pulled close to the hearth, and a table with an oil lamp flickering on top. And on that table, a mug of steaming coffee. I froze. Whoever lived here had just been inside. I called out one last time, louder. "Is anyone here?" A floorboard creaked from somewhere deeper in the cabin. The sound was faint, a single step, but enough to send a jolt through me. I backed toward the doorway. "Sorry," I said quickly. Didn't mean to startle anyone. "My car's just down the road. Another step." Then silence. Something about the quiet felt off. I could still hear the crackle of the fire, but not the natural noises outside. No crickets, no wind. Just the slow hiss of burning wood. I should have left right then, but the cold outside and the thought of that warm fire made me linger. I set my flashlight on the table and turned slowly toward the back hallway. "Look, I can leave if you want. Just, maybe you could point me toward a gas station." Nothing. I took one step down the narrow hall. The walls were covered in framed photos, old black and white ones, all of people standing in front of this same cabin. None of them smiled. One photo near the end of the hall caught my eye. A man about my age wearing a flannel jacket, standing beside a car that looked almost identical to mine. The date scribbled in pen along the bottom said October 31st, 1997. I didn't get to think long, because something moved in the reflection of the glass, a shadow tall passing right behind me. I spun around, hard hammering, but the hallway was empty. The front door was still open a crack, letting in a faint line of mist. I backed toward the main room again, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I noticed the mug of coffee on the table wasn't steaming anymore. It had gone cold. The fire, too, was burning lower than before, the flames dimming like they'd been left for hours. And the chairs? I could have sworn there were 2 by the fireplace. Now there was only 1. I picked up my flashlight and turned for the door. That's when I heard a voice, faint but clear, from just outside the open window. "Need a ride?" It sounded like a man, calm, almost friendly. I froze. The voice came again, closer this time. "Car trouble, huh?" I tried to look out, but the fog pressed against the glass so thick I couldn't see more than a few inches. My pulse was racing. "Who's there?" I called. A low chuckle answered me, soft and wet-sounding. "You already found me." That was enough. I bolted out the door, flashlight beam jerking across the trees. I ran back toward the road, slipping in the mud, branches clawing at my sleeves. When I reached the asphalt, I stopped to catch my breath and turned around. The fog had swallowed the path entirely. I couldn't even see the glow from the cabin anymore. I ran the rest of the way back to my car, climbed inside, and locked the doors. I don't know why. The battery was dead, the engine useless, but being inside felt safer. For a long time, nothing happened. Just silence. Then, through the fogged windshield, I saw a shape move along the road, the faint outline of a man walking slowly toward my car. I couldn't make out his face, but I saw the beam of another flashlight swinging in his hand. He stopped about 20 feet from the car and said, "You shouldn't go poking around places that ain't yours." My hand went for the horn, but before I could press it, his light clicked off. Darkness swallowed him. I waited, barely breathing for what felt like hours. When dawn finally bled into the fog, there was no sign of him. No footprints, nothing. Just the sound of birds starting up again. A passing truck driver stopped later that morning and gave me a lift into town. He said there hadn't been a cabin near mile marker 12 in years. The last one had burned down sometime in the early 2000s. When I told him what I'd seen, he just looked at me and said, "That stretch of road eats people, son. Best you stick to daylight from now on." I went back a week later in the afternoon just to convince myself I'd imagined it. I found the old dirt path easily, but it led to an overgrown clearing. There were no foundations, no walls, only a patch of blackened earth and the remains of a chimney, half crumbled, on one of the stones. Someone had carved initials, HM, 10-31-97. Next to it sat a rusted metal mug. When I picked it up, it was still faintly warm. The rest stop on Route 19, this happened to me on Halloween night 2022, somewhere along Route 19, cutting through the Appalachian Mountains in western Virginia. I still drive that stretch sometimes for work, but I've never stopped there again. Not since that night. I work in commercial delivery, running supplies between small towns. That night I was heading north toward Somersville, trying to make a deadline before morning. My GPS had been glitching all evening. The mountains do that. And I'd been on the road for nearly 5 hours straight. Around 1:30 a.m. I started fighting to keep my eyes open. The fog was heavy enough that it looked like waves rolling across the asphalt. That's when I saw a blue highway sign appear through the mist. Rest area, 1 mile. I remember exhaling in relief. I hadn't seen another vehicle in almost an hour and my eyelids felt like sandpaper. I figured I'd stop, stretch my legs, maybe grab a quick nap. The rest stop came into view a minute later. A small pull-off surrounded by trees lit by a few dim yellow lamps. There were 2 vending machines against a brick wall, an empty parking lot with maybe 8 spaces and a small building with a restroom sign above it. No cars, no people. I parked close to the lights, killed the engine, and just sat there for a bit. The silence was almost perfect except for the occasional groan of the wind through the trees. The kind of quiet that feels too thick, like the world's holding its breath. I stepped out and stretched. The air was cold and damp, carrying that deep wood smell, pine, wet dirt, a hint of decay. My breath looked like smoke under the lamplight. When I turned toward the restrooms, I noticed something odd. One of the vending machines had a faint glow inside, even though it was unplugged. I could see the cable hanging loose from the back, not connected to any outlet. The digital screen, however, was flickering, the kind of flicker an old CRT TV makes when it's dying. It wasn't showing text, though. Just a dim, pulsing blue light. I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds, confused, before deciding I was just too tired to make sense of anything. I headed to the restroom building, flashlight in hand. The metal door creaked loudly when I pushed it open. Inside, the light was fluorescent and harsh, buzzing constantly. There were 2 stalls, a single urinal, and a cracked mirror above the sink. Everything smelled like bleach and mildew. I went into the stall and that's when I heard it, the sound of a car pulling in outside. I froze, listening. The engine idled for a few seconds, then shut off. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, crunching on gravel. Someone else had stopped here. I waited, expecting to hear the restroom door open, but the footsteps stopped right outside. Nothing. I leaned slightly, trying to look under the stall door. The fluorescent light cast a faint shadow just beyond the entrance, a pair of boots facing toward the door. They didn't move. For a good 30 seconds, whoever it was just stood there, silent. Then the sound of the door hinges groaned softly as the door opened a few inches. I held my breath. The boots stepped inside, slow, heavy. The door creaked shut behind them. I couldn't see much except for the boots moving slowly past the sink. Then they stopped again. The person wasn't using the urinal, wasn't going into a stall, just standing there. That's when I noticed something stranger. The sound of the lights buzzing had faded. It took me a moment to realize that the bathroom was completely silent. No hum, no electrical noise. Even the ticking of the dripping faucet had stopped. My pulse was thundering in my ears. I was seconds away from revealing myself. Just saying something like, "Hey man, rest stop's open." Just finishing up, when I heard breathing, not mine, but heavy, wet, and uneven, right outside my stall. The boots turned to face my door. I backed up against the toilet, gripping my flashlight tight. I could see the tips of the boots now, dark brown, maybe work boots covered in mud. The breathing got louder, and then there was a slow tap, like fingers brushing against the stall door. I forced my voice to come out steady. Occupied. The breathing stopped. Then after a long pause, the person laughed. It wasn't a full laugh, not really. More like a low, broken exhale. It lasted a few seconds, then faded out completely. I didn't move until I heard the bathroom door creak open again. The boots turned and then the door closed behind them. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute, 2. Then I pushed the stall door open slowly and stepped out. The bathroom was empty. The door was closed again, just as I'd last seen it. I walked over and pushed it open, peering outside. The parking lot was empty. My truck sat under the same yellow light and there was no other vehicle in sight. No sound of an engine. No sign anyone had been there at all. I should have left right then. But exhaustion does weird things to your brain. You start explaining things away. Maybe the guy parked on the far side. Maybe he walked off into the woods for some reason. I splashed cold water on my face, took a deep breath, and stepped back outside. That's when I noticed something new. The vending machine's flicker was gone. The screen was dark, but there was something sitting on the ground in front of it, a muddy boot print, and next to it, a small folded piece of paper. I hesitated before picking it up. My fingers were shaking. The paper was damp but legible, just 2 words written in pencil. Still tired? I dropped it instantly. I ran back to my truck, slammed the doors, locked them, and started the engine. The headlights cut through the fog like blades. For a moment, I thought I saw movement near the tree line, something dark just beyond the reach of the lights. Then it was gone. I threw the truck into gear and sped off, tires screeching on the wet pavement. My heart didn't slow down until I was 20 miles away, and even then I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting headlights to appear behind me. When I finally reached a gas station near Summersville around 3:15 a.m., I pulled over to calm down. I got out, checked under the truck, checked the back. Nothing. But when I looked at my rear bumper, I saw a smear of mud. Not random, but shaped like a handprint. The fingers trailing down as if someone had held on while I drove. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I backed into something at the rest stop without noticing. That's what I still tell myself, even though deep down I know what I saw. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up that rest stop on Google Maps. I even tried the satellite view. There was no rest stop listed anywhere near that part of Route 19. The closest one, according to the map, was 30 miles north. Out of morbid curiosity, I mentioned it to a local mechanic I know in Beckley. When I told him roughly where it had been, he gave me this look I can't forget, somewhere between confusion and fear. "You said around mile marker 212. He asked. "Yeah," I said. "Small place, 2 vending machines, bathrooms, brick wall." He shook his head. "Son, that place burned down in '98. Some drifter fell asleep smoking in his truck. Whole lot went up. They never rebuilt it. State closed that pull-off for good." I just stared at him. Then what the hell did I stop at? He shrugged. "You sure you were awake?" I wish I could say I wasn't. I wish I could tell myself it was a dream or that exhaustion made me hallucinate. But every Halloween night since then, around 1:30 a.m., I get this urge to check my rearview mirror, like I'm expecting to see headlights in the fog. And sometimes, for a split second, I swear I do. Voices on the Mountain Road. This happened to me on Halloween night 2020, somewhere along the Appalachian backroads between Harlan, Kentucky and Bluefield, West Virginia. I was driving home from visiting my sister, who lived in a small town outside of Harlan. I left later than I should have, close to 11:45 p.m., and the trip should have taken just under 3 hours. Instead, it became the longest and most unnerving night of my life. The mountains that time of year are both beautiful and desolate, all orange leaves, steep drops and narrow twisting roads that seem to fold in on themselves. That night a fog had rolled in low and the moon was full but veiled behind clouds. My phone had lost signal 15 miles back, so I was relying on my memory and the occasional road sign to find my way. By 12:30 a.m., I was already fighting that creeping tiredness, that half-dream state where your eyes start to blur. I cracked the window for fresh air, letting in the sharp, damp chill. The smell of pine and rain was thick. The only sound was my tires against the wet pavement and the steady hum of the engine. That's when I heard it for the first time. It came faintly through the open window. A voice. At first, I thought it was the radio. I turned it off and the sound vanished for a second. Then it came again, this time clearer. It sounded like someone calling from far off in the woods. A man's voice. "Hey, can you help me?" I slowed instinctively, squinting into the fog, but there was nothing. No lights, no movement. The road was too narrow to stop, so I kept rolling, telling myself it was probably a hunter or someone from one of the tiny cabins scattered in the hills. But about half a mile later, I heard it again. "Hey, wait." This time it was closer. Too close. I hit the brakes and leaned forward, peering through the windshield. The sound had come from somewhere on the right side of the road, down the slope where the trees grew thick and the fog pooled like water. "Hello?" I called out, no answer. The night air poured in, cold and heavy. For a moment I thought I heard movement in the leaves, the crunch of footsteps, but it faded as quickly as it came. I rolled up the window and told myself I was overtired. It's amazing how quickly your mind starts playing tricks when you're alone in the dark. I drove another few miles, trying to shake it off. My dashboard clock read 12:48 a.m. when the next sound came, a woman's voice this time. Soft. Calm. "Stop, please." The sound was so sudden, so close that I slammed on the brakes without thinking. My headlights cut across the trees and white trunks, drifting fog, and then caught on something pale moving between them. It looked like a figure. Someone walking parallel to the road, just far enough back that the light barely touched them. I rolled the window down again, heart pounding. "Hey, are you okay?" The figure stopped. I couldn't see a face, just the shape of a person, maybe a woman, in something light-colored like a coat or dress. Then in the same soft voice, she said, "It's so cold. Please." I started to open my door and then something in the back of my head screamed, "Don't." I froze with my hand on the handle. The figure took one step forward, and I swear the fog shifted behind her, as if someone else had moved too. Another shape, darker, larger, standing just behind her. Then the voice came again, but this time it was from the opposite side of the road. "Can you help us?" I whipped my head left. Another voice, and a man's, echoed from the trees on that side. Then another, dozens, faint and overlapping, calling from both directions, some pleading, some whispering my name. I didn't wait to find out how they knew it. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and floored the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, tires spitting gravel as I tore up the next incline. The voices followed for a while, fading but not completely gone. It sounded like they were being carried on the wind, twisting around the bends in the road. Didn't slow down again until I hit a stretch with a small wooden sign that read Mountain View Overlook, 2 miles. Figured that meant civilization, maybe a ranger station or at least a parking area with lights. The clock said 1:03 a.m. when I reached it. The overlook was deserted, just a gravel lot, a wooden guardrail, and a view that disappeared into fog. I parked anyway, cut the engine, and sat there trying to breathe. I kept telling myself I just imagined it, that maybe the fog distorted the sound of animals or water, anything but what it felt like. Then, from the edge of the overlook, I heard a voice say my name again. Not shouted, whispered. It was so soft I almost thought it was in my head. But then it came again, slightly louder, and it was my own voice. It sounded exactly like me. Same tone, same rhythm. "Hey, come look at this." I could see nothing beyond the fog, but the sound came from maybe 20 feet away. "Just past the railing. Come here," it said again. Perfectly calm. I sat frozen, my fingers gripping the wheel so tight they hurt. The voice shifted slightly now behind me. "You have to see this." Every instinct told me to drive, but I couldn't move. It's like the sound pinned me in place. Then, as suddenly as it began, the fog outside seemed to thin. The trees reappeared, and in the reflection of the glass, I saw something standing directly behind my car. Tall, motionless, too dark to see a face. I started the engine and threw the car into reverse, tires crunching over gravel. The figure didn't move. It just seemed to tilt its head slightly, as if watching me leave. I sped down that mountain faster than I should have, half blind from fog and fear. By the time I hit the main highway, My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I drove until sunrise without stopping once. When I finally reached my apartment and stepped out into daylight, the silence felt deafening. I remember standing there for several minutes listening for any trace of those voices. Nothing. That night I told my sister what had happened. She listened quietly, then said something that still gives me chills. "You said you were on the road past Harlan, right? The one that runs by the old coal ridge?" I nodded. She said, "That's the stretch where those hikers went missing a few years back. The sheriff said they got lost in the fog, but they never found the bodies. Folks around here say you can still hear them calling for help some nights." I wanted to dismiss it, and I really did. But every Halloween since then, around midnight, I've noticed the same thing. If I drive anywhere in the mountains, I start hearing faint voices in the white noise of the radio. And sometimes, when it gets quiet enough, I hear my own voice whisper back. The motel on Crooked Creek Road. This happened to me and my girlfriend Emily on Halloween night 2021, somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Tennessee. I've told this story only a handful of times because honestly, I still don't fully understand what we saw, or who we might have shared that motel with. We were on our way back from a small Halloween get-together at a friend's cabin near Johnson City. The drive home should have taken 2 hours, but heavy fog had rolled in, and the winding mountain roads made everything feel slower and far more isolated than it should have. Around 11:40 p.m., we realized we had missed a turn somewhere. The GPS was bouncing between recalculating and no service. The road signs had become rare, the pavement uneven, and the woods pressed closer to the sides of the road like they were swallowing it. By 12:15 a.m., we'd been driving aimlessly for nearly 40 minutes when we spotted a dimly lit sign through the fog. Crooked Creek Motel, vacancy. We were exhausted, both of us. So we decided to stay the night and figure things out in the morning. The motel sat in a small clearing at the bottom of a slope, half hidden by pine trees. The building was a single row of rooms under a flickering fluorescent strip. An old Coke machine hummed near the office, its light the only real source of color in the otherwise gray scene. Inside the office, an elderly man sat behind the counter watching a small, static-filled TV. He barely looked up when we came in. His eyes were cloudy, his skin pale under the buzzing light. "Just the two of you?" he asked in a low, slurred drawl. "Yeah," I said. "Do you have a room available?" He nodded slowly, pushed a key toward me, an actual brass key with a big wooden tag that said Room 7, and mumbled, "40 cash. Checkout's 11. I handed him the money and we left without another word. As we walked back toward the car, I noticed something odd. All the other parking spots were empty except one, near the far end of the building. An old dark green pickup truck sat there, half covered in fallen leaves. "Guess we're not the only ones staying here," Emily said, trying to sound casual. I smiled weakly, but something about that truck gave me a weird feeling. It looked like it hadn't moved in weeks. Our room was small and smelled faintly of mildew. The carpet was damp in one corner and the wallpaper was peeling, but it was warm, and at that point that was all we cared about. We locked the door, drew the curtains, and tried to settle in. Around 1:30 a.m., I woke up suddenly. The sound that had pulled me out of sleep was faint, a slow, deliberate tap. Tap, tap coming from somewhere outside the window. I turned my head toward the curtain. Emily was still asleep, breathing softly beside me. I listened. The tapping came again, followed by what sounded like a low shuffle on gravel. At first, I figured it might be a branch moving in the wind. But when I peeked through the curtain, the air outside was still and not a breeze. That's when I saw the pickup truck's headlights flash once. Just a single flicker. It was quick, almost like someone had hit the unlock button, but the lights didn't stay on and I didn't hear a door open. I watched for maybe a full minute, eyes straining in the dark before finally pulling back. My heart was pounding, but I didn't want to wake Emily unless I had to. Another few minutes passed. Silence. I started to convince myself I'd imagined it. Then, from somewhere just outside our door, I heard a slow dragging sound, like something heavy scraping across the pavement. My chest tightened. The sound stopped directly outside our room. Emily stirred beside me. "What's wrong?" she whispered groggily. "Someone's outside," I mouthed. We both sat frozen, listening. The only sound was that faint hum of the neon light outside and the quiet tick of the wall clock. Then came 3 soft knocks on the door. Knock, 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 not pounding, almost polite. Emily looked at me, her face pale. Did the old man say there were other guests? I shook my head. I went to the door, keeping the chain lock on, and said, "Yeah?" No response. I waited a few seconds, then opened the curtain just enough to see through the small gap. There was no one there. The walkway was empty. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Wet footprints leading from the direction of the old truck straight to our door. And then stopping. They didn't go back the other way, just ended right in front of us. I locked everything again, double-checking the latch, and told Emily to try to get some rest while I stayed up for a bit. She agreed reluctantly. I sat on the edge of the bed with the lights off, staring toward the door. The minutes dragged. Around 2:10 a.m. I heard the footsteps again. Not outside this time, but above us the ceiling creaked, step, step, step. But the motel was a single-story building. I felt the blood drain from my face. Emily was awake again by now, wide-eyed and clutching my arm. The creaking moved from one end of the room to the other, slow and deliberate. I grabbed my phone, still no signal. Then, from the ceiling vent above the bathroom, we both heard a faint breathing sound. It was unmistakable, deep labored inhales, like someone struggling to stay quiet. Emily whispered, "We need to go." We packed our stuff as fast as possible, trying not to make noise. I opened the door slowly, scanning the walkway. Still empty. The footprints were gone, completely gone. We hurried to the car, tossed our bags in, and started the engine. As I reversed out of the lot, Emily gasped and grabbed my arm. "Look." The green pickup's headlights were on again. Through the fogged windshield, I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat now. A figure slumped forward, unmoving. For a moment, I thought maybe he was asleep. Then the driver's head slowly turned toward us. The face was pale and colorless, like wax. The eyes reflected the headlights, unblinking. I floored it. We tore out of that lot and didn't stop until we reached the highway, where a sign finally read Route 11 East. I didn't breathe easy until we were 20 miles away and the fog had thinned. When the sun rose, we stopped at a diner. The waitress asked where we'd come from, and when I said Crooked Creek Road, she frowned. "That place burned down years ago," she said. "About 2015, I think. Old man who ran it died in one of the rooms. Folks say sometimes people still see the lights on out there, but that whole strip's been abandoned since." I wanted to argue. Tell her we were just there, that we talked to the man. But Emily looked at me, shaking her head slightly. We paid, left, and never talked about it again. But 2 weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, my stomach dropped. It was faint, crackling, distant, but unmistakable. A slow, deliberate tap. Tap, tap on glass, then a voice, slurred and old, whispering, "Checkout's 11. The gas station at the end of Miller's Road. This happened to me on Halloween night 2022, deep in the Appalachian foothills of Western Virginia. I was on my way back from visiting my parents' place, a small town near Big Stone Gap, driving toward Roanoke. It was supposed to be a 5-hour trip, but a bad detour through the mountains added almost 2 hours. By 12:45 a.m., I was running low on gas, low on patience, and completely alone on that twisting road. No signal, no houses. Just thick, wet fog and the occasional rustle of trees brushing the side of my car as the road narrowed. I remember checking my gauge and seeing the needle drop just below a quarter tank. I told myself I'd stop at the next open station if I could even find one. Around 1:10 a.m., I saw a faint glow through the mist. At first, I thought it was another car coming toward me, but as I got closer, the outline of an old Gulf-style gas station came into view. The sign was rusted and unreadable, half its bulbs flickering. The place looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years, except the lights were on. I pulled in slowly. The gravel crunched beneath my tires. There were 2 old pumps, the kind with rolling numbers and cracked glass. One of them was covered in plastic, but the other looked operational. A faded paper sign was taped to it, "Pay inside." The front door was glass with an open sign glowing red. I killed the engine and stepped out. The air was freezing, sharp with the smell of wet pine and gasoline. The bell over the door jingled when I entered. The place was small. A few dusty shelves of snacks, an old soda fridge humming in the corner, and a counter near the back. A man stood behind it, staring straight ahead. He looked to be in his late 50s, thin with a pale face and gray stubble. He wore a dark green jacket with a name patch that read, Earl. "Evenin'," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond right away. Just looked at me with this blank expression. Then after a beat too long, he said, "Pump work fine. You pay first." His voice was deep but oddly flat, no inflection like he was reading lines he'd practiced. "Sure," I said, pulling out my wallet. "Just $30, please." He nodded once very slowly and took the cash without ever looking down. His eyes stayed locked on mine the entire time. Something about it put me on edge. "Been a long night," I said. "Didn't think I'd find anything open out here." He blinked, finally, and said, "We're always open." He said it in the same tone. I managed a nervous laugh, but he didn't react. The silence between us stretched too long. Then from somewhere behind the counter I heard it, a faint thudding sound, rhythmic like footsteps or something hitting wood. Earl didn't move. Didn't glance toward it. "You got someone working in the back?" I asked. He didn't answer. Just turned his head slightly toward the sound, then back to me and said, "Restroom's out back if you need it." It was such a strange response that I didn't know what to say. I nodded awkwardly and stepped back outside to pump my gas. The fog had thickened, curling around the lights like smoke. The sound from inside and the dull thump, thump, thump seemed to echo faintly even through the walls. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the numbers rolling on the pump. But halfway through, the nozzle clicked off early. The total read 2366. I tried again, nothing. The pump was dead. "Earl?" I called toward the door, no response. When I turned, I noticed something else. A light flickering in the back room of the station, visible through a half-open door behind the counter. It looked like a fluorescent bulb struggling to stay lit. For some reason, curiosity maybe, I walked back inside. The bell chimed again. Earl was still standing behind the counter in the exact same position. Only now he wasn't facing me. He was facing the back room where the light was flickering. "Hey," I said. Pump shut off early, no reaction. The thudding sound came again, louder this time. I took a step closer. "You okay, man?" That's when I realized something that made my stomach twist. The clock behind the counter, a simple wall clock with black hands, it wasn't moving. The second hand was stuck at 12. The humming of the fridge had stopped too. The entire building felt dead, silent, except for the steady thump from the back. I was about to back away when Earl finally spoke, still facing the back room. "You shouldn't be here after 1. His voice was quieter, almost trembling now. "Why?" I asked, my throat dry. He turned toward me slowly, and so slowly it didn't seem human. His eyes looked different now, darker, sunken, and glassy, like he hadn't blinked in hours. Before I could say anything else, something moved behind him. Through the gap in the door, I saw a shape, tall, hunched, its outline distorted by the flickering light. It looked like a person, but the way it moved was wrong, jerky, like a puppet pulled on strings. Earl's lips moved again, but no sound came out. Then finally he whispered, "Don't look at it." I didn't listen. I looked. The shape stepped into the doorway, and for a split second I saw it clearly. It had no face, just smooth, pale skin where its eyes and mouth should have been. But it made noise, a wet, dragging breath that filled the room. I stumbled back, knocking over a rack of chips. Earl shouted, or maybe he tried to, but his voice came out warped, like a tape slowing down. "Go!" The thing took one step forward, and every light in the gas station went out. I ran. The bell above the door jangled violently as I shoved through it and sprinted to my car. I jumped in, turned the key, nothing, dead. I slammed the door locks down, my breath fogging the glass. The fog outside was so thick now I couldn't see the pumps. Couldn't even see the front of the station. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Earl, he was standing under the overhang, illuminated by a single flickering light. He raised one hand slowly, pointing toward the road. I turned the key again. This time the engine roared to life. I floored it out of that lot, tires spitting gravel as the fog swallowed everything behind me. I didn't look back. Not until I'd driven at least 10 miles. When I finally glanced in the mirror, the fog was gone, just open road and trees. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. By 2:17 a.m., I reached a small town and pulled into a brightly lit Shell station. The cashier, a young guy maybe in his 20s, looked up as I walked in. "You okay, man? You look white as a ghost." "Yeah," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Just came from that gas station down the road. Miller's Road, I think it's called." He frowned. "You mean the old Gulf station? That place burned down years ago. Ain't been open since I was a kid." I laughed nervously, but he didn't smile. When I went back out to my car, I noticed something that made my hands shake all over again. The receipt taped to my dash. I hadn't printed it. I hadn't paid for it. But there it was. White paper, typewritten, smudged with grease. 23 by 66. Paid in full. Pump number 2. Thank you for stopping at Miller's Gas. Come again. Underneath, scribbled in shaky handwriting, was one more line. You shouldn't be here after 1. The detour through Hollow Creek, this happened on Halloween night 2021, somewhere between Wise County and Buchanan County, Virginia. I've driven through those back roads 100 times in my life, but that night still stands out in my memory like a deep bruise, the kind of memory you don't revisit unless something reminds you of it. I was heading home after spending the evening with friends. I remember checking my watch, 11:17 p.m., as I pulled onto the old highway that runs along the ridge. The air was damp, foggy, and cold enough that I could see my breath when I stopped for gas earlier. The kind of Appalachian night where sound travels strange. Everything feels distant and close at the same time. About 40 minutes into the drive, my phone GPS pinged. The route I always took home, Route 83, was showing heavy fog and construction. A notification popped up suggesting an alternate route. Hollow Creek Road, 27 minutes faster. I'd never heard of that road, but I was tired and the fog was getting thicker by the mile. Against my better judgment, I hit accept. That was mistake number 1. The turn came up fast, a small unlit road that disappeared into the woods. The asphalt looked cracked, more like an old service path than a highway, but the GPS insisted it was a viable route. Within minutes, the trees pressed close on both sides. The fog thickened, swirling in the beams of my headlights like smoke. The road started to twist and dip in sharp angles, the kind of turns you take at 15 miles per hour or risk sliding off into the trees. After about 10 minutes, I realized something felt off. The road signs were missing. Not blank, just gone. No mileage markers, no curve warnings, nothing but bare poles standing empty. The GPS map had turned completely white, showing only my blue location dot floating in empty space. The voice that usually gave directions was silent. That's when I started feeling it. That quiet kind of panic that starts in your gut. I told myself I'd turn around at the next clearing, but the road just kept winding deeper into the woods. Then, at 12:04 a.m., I saw a light up ahead. It looked like the taillights of another car, red dots flickering faintly through the fog. Relief hit me so hard I actually laughed. I sped up a little, trying to catch up. But as I rounded the bend, I realized something strange. The lights weren't moving. They stayed perfectly still, just glowing red through the haze. When I got closer, my headlights revealed what they really were: 2 red reflectors nailed to a tree. I felt my stomach drop. Someone had put them there deliberately. I slowed to a crawl, scanning the woods on both sides. The trees were skeletal, thin, their branches like arms. The only sounds were the engine and the occasional ping of cooling metal. Then faintly I heard something else. A voice. It sounded like a man, calling from somewhere in the fog ahead. "Hey, stop a sec." I froze. The tone wasn't scared or panicked, just casual, like someone asking for a lift. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "Who's there?" I called out. No answer. I inched forward. The voice came again, closer this time. "Need a hand?" The way it echoed was strange, not directional. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off the fog and trees. That's when my headlights caught movement up ahead, a figure walking along the right side of the road. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket and a cap pulled low. His clothes looked wet, hanging off him. I slowed, lowering the window slightly. "You okay?" I asked. The man turned slowly toward me. His face was pale, but his eyes looked wrong, like he wasn't really seeing me, just looking through me. Then he smiled. A small, strange smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You shouldn't be on this road," he said quietly. I started to reply, but he raised one hand, not to wave, but to point. He pointed directly into the trees. "Ends that way," he said. I followed his finger, seeing only darkness and fog. When I turned back to him, he was gone. Just gone. No footsteps, no sound. Nothing but the quiet hum of my engine and the ticking of the clock on the dash. I floored it. The road seemed to narrow the faster I went. The trees looked closer, almost leaning inward. The fog pressed so thick I could barely see beyond the hood. Then the road dipped sharply and I hit something. A bump hard enough to jolt me against the seatbelt. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding. When I stepped out to check, the cold hit me like a wall. My breath puffed white into the dark. The smell of damp earth and old leaves was overwhelming. But there was something else. Faint, metallic, like rust. Blood. There was a smear of it across the bumper. No body. No animal, nothing. I jumped back in the car, locked the doors, and kept driving. I just wanted off that road. After another 10 minutes, the fog broke slightly, revealing an old wooden sign on the side of the road. It read, "Welcome to Hollow Creek. Population 42." But every number had been scratched out, carved over with deep gouges. I passed through what looked like a small, abandoned town, a few shacks, a general store with boarded windows, a rusted swing set creaking in the wind. Every building was dark, except one. A single porch light glowed in front of a small white church at the far end of the road. The sign out front said Hollow Creek Baptist, and below it, service every Sunday, 12 a.m. The time on my dash read 12:22. Something inside me told me to keep driving, but the road ended there. Just dirt and trees beyond the church. So I stopped. As I sat there trying to decide whether to turn back, I noticed movement in the church window, a figure standing behind the glass, then another, then another. Within seconds, there were at least a dozen silhouettes, all perfectly still. Facing my car, none of them moved. My headlights flickered once, then in eerie synchronization, every silhouette raised one arm and pointed toward me. I didn't think. I just threw the car in reverse, tires spinning on gravel as I backed up, turned around and tore down the road. The fog seemed thicker again, alive, wrapping around the car as I drove blind. I could swear I heard voices rising over the hum of the engine, whispering my name. Then the GPS, which had been dead for almost an hour, suddenly spoke. "Turn left." I did. And just like that, the fog broke. I was back on Route 83, less than 5 miles from home. No idea how. When I got home, I checked my phone's history. No sign of any Hollow Creek Road. Google Maps didn't list it. None of my friends had ever heard of it. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I asked a coworker who grew up in that area. He went quiet for a moment, then said, "My granddad used to talk about that place. Hollow Creek was a mining town back in the 40s. Landslide wiped it off the map. Whole town buried, 40-some people died. They say the road still shows up sometimes, but only on foggy nights. I laughed it off, pretended it didn't bother me, but I haven't used GPS shortcuts since. And every Halloween night, if I'm driving alone through the Appalachians, I keep the route manual, because somewhere past midnight when the fog gets thick, my phone always buzzes and the same notification appears again. Faster route found, Hollow Creek Road. The woman beside the highway. I've been a long-haul truck driver for over 20 years now, and I've seen some strange things on the road. You drive through the Appalachians long enough, those twisting highways between North Carolina and Tennessee, you start to understand why folks around here believe in ghosts. But nothing, and I mean nothing, ever shook me like what happened on Halloween night of 2018, somewhere near the stretch of I-26 just past Irwin, Tennessee. It was a cold night, one of those when the fog rolls in so heavy it swallows the world whole. I was running a late haul for a distribution company, hauling a load of food supplies from Asheville down toward Knoxville. I'd left late, hoping to make up time before the mountain roads iced over. It was around 1:40 a.m. when I first saw her. The highway was nearly empty. Just my rig, the soft hum of the engine, and that long stretch of gray asphalt curling through the fog. My headlights caught movement on the shoulder. A person. A woman standing there right beside the guardrail, one arm raised like she was flagging me down. At first I thought maybe her car had broken down or she'd been in an accident. The fog was thick enough to hide wreckage, and this stretch of road was miles from the nearest town. I slowed down and flipped on my hazards. As I got closer, I could see more detail. She was wearing a long, pale dressing, the kind you might wear to a formal dinner or something. Her hair was dark, tangled, and her skin looked almost bluish under the headlights. I remember saying out loud, "What the hell is she doing out here?" I pulled over and rolled down the passenger window. The air that hit me was freezing, sharp enough to sting my face. "Hey, you okay, ma'am?" I called. She didn't answer right away. Just stared at me. Her eyes were wide, like she wasn't sure what I was, or maybe she didn't recognize what she was seeing. Then she nodded slowly. "My car," she said softly, pointing back into the fog. It went off the road. I grabbed my flashlight and hopped out. The moment my boots hit the ground, I realized how quiet it was. No wind, no insects, no distant engines. Just the soft clicking of my cooling brakes and my own breath. I shined the light toward where she was pointing, but there was nothing. No car, no tire marks, just a slope disappearing into black trees. "Where exactly?" I asked. She didn't move closer, didn't even turn her head. "Down there," she said again, same flat tone. Something about her voice made me uneasy. It sounded hollow, like she was repeating a memory instead of speaking to me. I looked again, trying to make sense of it. Maybe the car had rolled further down the embankment, I thought. But there was no crash smell, no broken glass, nothing. Then I turned back toward her. She was closer now, standing right beside the open passenger door of my truck. I swear I didn't hear her move. Not a single footstep on the gravel. "Wait," I said, stepping toward her. "Just..." Before I could finish, she climbed up into the cab and sat in the passenger seat. It caught me completely off guard, but she didn't look threatening and just lost. So I told myself to stay calm. Maybe she was in shock. Once I was back in the driver's seat, I tried to talk to her again. "Look, I can call the highway patrol, all right? They'll help find your car." She didn't respond, just kept staring straight ahead through the windshield. Her hands were resting on her lap, perfectly still. I noticed her fingernails, dirt under them, dark streaks that looked like old blood. The longer she sat there, the colder the cab got. I turned up the heater, but it didn't help much. After about a minute, she spoke again. "Do you know what time it is?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the hum of the engine. About 2, I said. "You been out here long?" She smiled a little, but it wasn't a friendly smile. More like she was remembering something painful. "I've been waiting," she said. "For what?" I asked. She turned her head toward me then, and I swear my chest tightened. Her eyes were completely black. No whites, no reflection from the dash lights, just dark voids. I froze. Then, in a blink, she looked normal again. I told myself I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks. But the longer I looked at her, the more wrong she seemed. Her dress wasn't just pale, it was wet. The seat beneath her was damp, and a faint smell filled the cab. Not perfume, not sweat, but river water. Cold, stale, like mud and algae. That's when I noticed her feet were bare, and they were dirty, caked with dried silt. I reached for my phone, pretending to check for signal, but my hands were trembling. "You live around here?" I asked, trying to sound calm. She didn't answer. Instead, she tilted her head slightly and said, "You shouldn't have stopped." My stomach dropped. "Excuse me?" Her voice grew quieter. "He doesn't like when people stop." Something moved outside the truck. A scraping sound, and slow and deliberate, along the trailer's metal siding. I froze, staring into the side mirror. But all I could see was fog. The sound moved around toward the back, then stopped. I reached for the door handle. "I think I'm gonna..." She grabbed my wrist. Her hand was ice cold, like she'd been holding it in snow. I tried to pull away, but she was strong, unnaturally strong for someone her size. Then she whispered, "Don't look." That's when I heard it. A thud. then another, like heavy footsteps climbing up onto the back of the trailer. Each impact made the whole rig vibrate. I turned the key, started the engine and floored it. The truck roared forward, gears grinding as I pushed it to 60, 70. The banging on the trailer grew louder, faster, as if something was crawling its way toward the cab. "Make it stop," I yelled, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. She just sat there, expressionless, staring out the windshield. The banging stopped as suddenly as it had started. I looked over. She was gone. Just gone. The passenger seat was empty, but the cushion was still wet. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I didn't dare stop until I hit the next truck stop about 20 miles down. When I finally parked, I jumped out, ran to the back of the trailer, and shined my flashlight along the sides. There were handprints, dozens of them, muddy, smeared, dragging downward like someone had tried to climb up, or down. I called the local sheriff's office and reported what happened. They sent a deputy to check it out. He looked over the prints, then looked at me. "You said this was around mile marker 124? "Yeah," I said. He sighed and nodded slowly. "You're not the first driver to see her." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" He pointed down the highway. "There's an old bridge over the Nolichucky River about 2 miles before that spot. Woman drove off it back in 1998, Halloween night. They say she's still out there flagging people down." I laughed nervously. "You're serious?" He shrugged. "Believe what you want, but we've had at least 6 reports like yours in the last decade. Always the same thing. Wet dress, no shoes, smells like river water." He handed me a card with his name and department. "If you ever drive that route again," he said, "don't stop for anyone near the creek. Just keep going." I didn't sleep that night. When I finally checked the passenger seat the next morning, it was bone dry. No smell, no dampness, like she'd never been there. But there's one thing that still messes with me. I keep a dash cam running at all times, looping footage every few hours. That night, the camera was still recording. When I reviewed it later, I saw myself pull over, get out, open the passenger door, and then climb back in and drive off. But there was no one there. The passenger seat was empty the whole time. Still, in the reflection of the windshield, just for a second before I drove off, I swear you can see her face, pressed against the glass, watching me from outside the cab.